Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've assembled here to discuss climate change and human rights violations, and whether news media is to blame for the growing rift of these topics in our society. For many years now, climate change has been a front runner in political discussion all around the world. With global emissions reaching record levels, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on world leaders to come to New York for the Climate Action Summit. Due to climate change, countries like Haiti have been witness to disaster after disaster, leaving the country and its people in extreme poverty. Already prone to a wide array of environmental stressors, including flooding, droughts, hurricanes, earthquakes, and landslides, many more. Haiti has also experienced declining GDP since 1982 and has seen serious political turmoil throughout the past few decades. It was recently ranked as the most vulnerable country in the world to climate change on an index developed by Maplecroft, a global risk management firm. Also, due to rising sea levels, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia has experienced massive coral bleaching, which means that 50% of all coral life in the reef has died out. On the other hand, in terms of human rights violations, Mozambique's state security forces continue to be implicated in serious human rights violations. They allegedly committed arbitrary arrests in their response to attacks by suspected Islamist armed groups in the northern province of Cabo Delgado. Thousands of people were displaced as armed men attacked villages, burnt houses, and killed local residents. The media has been under threat after the government issued a decree that imposed high fees on news organizations seeking to operate in the country. Climate change and human rights violations go hand in hand. Smaller, especially coastal countries, are greatly affected by climate change, as for example, Haiti. And it's the duty of other nations to minimize their carbon footprint so as to not infringe on the rights of people that don't have the economic background or strength to really try to fix their own situation. The overlying question is news coverage to blame for the terror and the rift in our society regarding climate change and human rights violations? Is the media slacking off on climate change coverage? If they are, why? Or is it not the media, but some other influence that is increasing the rift between climate change and human rights? Our panel today is here to discuss just that. Let's begin. We're going to begin with our opening statements. For the motion, we have Sahar Falaki, a second-year advertising major, and Sarah, who's a third-year PR major. Against the motion, we have Daliel Kadhi, a second-year journalist, and Wajid, a fourth-year advertising major. Sahar, would you like to begin with your opening statements?
Thank you so much. So, hi. Today I'll be talking about how media is causing us to be conflicted between the climate crisis which is going on and our human rights violation. So first of all, I would like to say, if our human rights were not violated, then we would not be sitting here right now, struggling to reverse an issue which is going on. Most of us spend most of our time checking social media. Therefore, social media is one of the biggest influencers in our life. Sometimes it can indirectly affect you without you even noticing, according to MacLeod et al. 2009. I'll be going over 3 points to prove to you guys. The 3 points I'll be going over is, firstly, I'll prove you guys that the media coverage is to blame for the current climate change skeptics. Second of all, media has an agenda. They twist reality to affect the audience's perception. Thirdly, what media fails to show is the full picture. Earth would no longer provide our necessities in 100 years. So back in the 70s, there was an oil company called the Exxon, which is now known as the ExxonMobil. They invested in researchers, and the researchers declared that burning petroleum derivatives will influence the atmosphere, as the carbon dioxide discharge will result in the greenhouse effect. By 1980s, an email from a former employee named Lenny Bernstein
reveals how they were fully aware of all the consequences, such as sea level rising and ice caps melting. A memo was also later uncovered about how they were trying to emphasize the uncertainty about the research they found around the atmosphere, the climate change. This is why, which is probably like this is the reason why half of you over here probably do not believe in climate change. If that memo would have been released in a traditional media, such as newspaper, and informed people, then it would have been revoked, decreasing the chances of climate crisis. Now, off to my second topic. So, media has an agenda and they twist reality. So the second most circulated newspaper in the US is the Wall Street Journal. As you can probably realize, throughout the way they talk in their videos and the title of newspapers that they make, it makes you doubt yourself. One of their heading of their newspapers is, which directly and indirectly distorts our perception in their favor, is example, climate change is real, but the new Green Deal is not the solution. While being green is probably one of our best chances to reverse this situation. This proves that media sets an agenda. Evidently, their actions are concerned with making a profit rather than contributing to save the planet. For example, Fox News promotes oil and gas industries, as well as other companies that are reliant on gas, such as auto industry cars. Some of their major promoters are Toyota, Volvo, and Acura. Therefore, to not lose their promoters, they distort the truth and put climate change under the question for their audiences. For instance, a 2015 study revealed that at certain situations, critical circumstances, CNN reviewers saw 5 times more ad-related videos rather than climate change, which in relation to human rights violation, it takes away the guarantee of a meaningful and informed participation. Now, lastly, the point I'm going to be going over is media is failing to show the full picture. So as you all probably know, Stephen Hawking, who were a British theoretical physicist, author, and a professor. He was the most popular for his black hole and relativity theory, and science books such as A Brief History of Time. He gave us 100 years as a deadline to leave this planet and call another planet home. Some people fail to realize there's more to it, though. One of the human rights that are being violated on a long-term basis is to prevent human harms brought about by environmental change and ensure that everybody appreciates the advantages of science and its application. At the time being, we are in the start of the 6th mass reduction. Up to 200 species are terminated every day. Environmental change puts the nourishment supplies of individuals and some creating countries at risk. Floods, dry seasons, and progressively exceptional storms, heat waves, out-of-control fires can dry down harvest yields, annihilate animals, which ends up meddling with our food supplies. How much longer will it take for the news media to actually say this loud and clear? Because there's no other side to this story. Their irresponsibility about the information they deliver cause our human rights to be violated. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahar. There's a very interesting point about the media trying to set an agenda. Dahlia, would you like to, do you have any comments about that?
Yes, actually. So, news media is to blame then, is it? As if the news media is an actual active individual that can cause all these things to happen. So, I suppose news media caused the climate crisis as well then, and human rights violations to happen. And of course the news media made us waste all our time on social media. It absolutely twisted our arm and forced us to do that. Let's delve a little deeper, shall we? We are against the notion that news media coverage is to blame for the tear between climate crisis and human rights violation. Media coverage of the environment has only truly begun in the early 2000s, while the entire environmentalism movement actually began in the early 20th century, along with its disputes. So who is the culprit then? Our theory is humans. The climate crisis is caused by humans. There's no denying it. It's literally carried out and made possible by human hands. According to an article by Z. Cosfather in Carbon Brief, almost all the long-term warming can be explained by greenhouse gas emissions and other human activities. Humans were responsible for around 110 10% of observed warming, ranging from 72 to 146%, with natural factors in isolation leading to a slight cooling over the past 50 years. Similarly, the recent U.S. Fourth National Climate Assessment found that between 93 to 123 of observed 1951 to 2010 warming was due to human activities. These conclusions had led to some confusion as to how more than 100% of observed warming could possibly be due to human contribution. But that's only possible because natural climate change associated with volcanoes and solar activity would most likely have resulted in slight cooling over the past 50 years, offsetting some of the warming associated with human activities. Essentially, it's been offsetting the damage we have done. If it weren't for nature helping us out a little bit, we would all have been burning up by now. Humans are not just to blame for climate change. We are all to blame. We are more than to blame. If it were up to us, the world would have combusted by now. It's the greenhouse gases we emit and other human activities we continue to pursue. The news media doesn't tear down our forests. The news media doesn't bomb the houses of innocent civilians. Heck, the news media doesn't even choose if we recycle or not. But we choose not to do that anyways. The news media simply reports on what's going on, and that is what we need to understand so we can start taking ownership of our own actions and start taking action to reform and make the current situation better. We're using the media as a scapegoat for issues we are causing. We are putting the blame on them and the entire entity of the media because it is convenient to us. We blame the media for everything, from our kids' bad behavior to why we're so unhealthy, to climate change, to human rights violations. But really, why don't we start taking a little ownership and accountability? Why don't we hold a little social responsibility? As humans, we don't want to blame ourselves, and yes, it's easier to put the blame on something else. But if we're so against the media, then why are we consuming it? Why are we funding it? It's the same with climate change. If we're so appalled by it, then why do we continue to harm the environment? Why are we not doing anything about it but simply talking, complaining, and blaming and pointing the finger at someone else or something else? And as for human rights violations, who is responsible for them as well? It's not people who pull triggers, who commit war crimes, who rape, who torture, who discriminate. It's people. And it's people in governments responsible for economic and political injustices too. It's people, not media. As for the tear between people and why people have differentiations in attitudes, there have always been conflicts, regardless of media involvement or not. Human history is filled with wars and opposing groups of people, from the smallest disputes to the more grandiose. This ranges from World War I to the black, blue, or white and gold dress. Humans are inclined to pick a side and then defend it, with or without media inciting. This is a biological part of being a person, according to a study done by Wynne Perry in 2012. It's part of our very human nature and composition. News media being a part of all the disputes and conflicts is highly doubtful. The tear is already present. The attitudes and beliefs are attained before the intervention of media. The media shows us what each side is doing, broadcasts the protests and decisions, but it does not cause the tear. News media is simply there to inform people on events and ongoing issues. This can go back to two-step flow theory that suggests without a mediator or opinion leader, news is ineffective. News media simply reports. It is not to blame. Not to mention that news media means people around the world are able to follow issues and build their own opinions, and opposing groups can see what their own group is doing as well as the other side. And this has actually been shown to bring people together rather than tear them apart. If anything, the news media is what aids understanding. Groups which have never been able to see eye to eye now are. A study conducted in 2017 by Eric Miller found that mass media, when deployed properly, can use entertainment and information to allow these groups to get to know each other. To allow these groups to get to know each other, to build empathy and understanding. News media is enabling people to send messages of peace where there once was war and hate. As an example, Sunni and Shia Muslims. The dispute between these two groups is historic, and for thousands of years it was simply bad blood. Until recently, that is. Sunni and Shia leaders called all Muslims to embrace love, respect, and oneness. And through what channel did they do this? None other than news media. Examples of this can be seen on CNN, The Telegraph, and simply the messages broadcasted through Sunni and Shia Islamic TV channels. This would not have been possible without news media outlets broadcasting the message. Today, Sunni versus Shia is a trivial concept to most youth. The belief of youth today is that Sunni and Shia are both Muslim and fall under Islam and follow one and the same doctrine. The topic is not even brought up, and this is an exponential change in perspective compared to previous generations who focused on conflict and difference in beliefs and fought over them. If a religious dispute that big was been able to be solved through the news media, then how could it possibly cause a tear between climate crisis and human rights violations? If anything, the news media is once again a platform for building understanding and promoting unity. It reports on issues objectively and helps groups see the other side's point of view. That's why nowadays we have more understanding than ever before and respect for differing opinions, as the news media enables and enforces just that. The news media is not to blame for the tear in beliefs. In fact, the situation seems to be quite the contrary.
Thank you, Dahlia. Sarah, would you like to present your opening statement?
Okay. When climate change makes it onto the news agenda, it is important to acknowledge the coverage it does not get. The choice of slant from the media outlets and political ideologies and preferences can skew our perception of reality. And that is how they set agendas, and if that is not done correctly, we cannot take the action that we are supposed to be taking. So the three factors I'm going to cover are the delayed information that they play around with, and the inaccuracy, and the intensity of coverage. So the first point is, according to for example, for the timely manner that they do not follow through is, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in America, revealed a result of an average of 658 individuals death yearly due to heat-related causes, and 8,081 deaths were reported from 1999 to 2010. And this coverage was not released until years later, and this violates human rights because it shows that they're not accountable. They're not uploading their information as we're guaranteed with. So if they were revealing information in a timely manner, the informative coverage could have reinforced an understanding for us in that time, and that would have motivated us to take action earlier and not let it all build up to now. And that would have also enabled a domino effect, like bring us all together, especially how it has access to such a huge amount of people. So one of the theories that this can be explained are the agenda setting theory. The media has the power to focus on public discussion, and once a story is framed and that is how we perceive the world, that can obscure our perception. So it is important how they should release the information in a timely manner. Another point is the deserving media coverage isn't being sustained with the frequency and intensity it deserves. This violates the human rights principle of participation and inclusion, which may indicate the ingenuine information. Evidently, the notion climate crisis already creates a moral panic and is not fairly treated like one by the media. The media does not relate the extreme weather events to climate change, which kind of confirms the framing theory as well. The way they deliver information is quite important, because if, for example, if they're not putting in the intensity or like the focus on it so much, it might not allow us to create a public opinion to take action. For example, in 2018, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, stated that we have 12 years to save ourselves for even more extreme weather events and disasters. CNN News covered this for only 1 minute and 8 seconds. Fox News covered it for 5 minutes and called it a waste of time. And overall, the statistics for Fox News show that on top of that, the accuracy of the information was 28%, and it was 72% misleading. This deserves to be on every news program because it is a critical threat to us. Instead, the news amplified their messages on the current president of the United States, such as Donald Trump, and mostly about his reactions, wordings, and attitudes. And he was still treated as a television personality. This suggests a spotty coverage rather than an important one. Several individuals don't recognize how serious this issue is, and the media is to blame for because it does not stress how serious it is, and this consequently affects the receiver's end of righteousness of excessive information, which is derived and controlled by the participation and inclusion of the media. So another important point is that we do not receive an accurate information from the media, and sometimes there is updates or like treatments to that, but we still panic about this because we're not updated about it. If the receivers are not informed about treatments or causes and all, how can we know there are efforts being taken and lessen our worries? For instance, on Sky News of Australia reported that Australia is on the right path to ease the crisis, yet they were not credited for this unspoken action. Their contribution was not projected and it was unfairly disregarded, silenced, and unspoken about, according to Australia's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. As part of the international agreement, the UN asked Australia to do their bit, and so they did. Yet the ABC channel publicly interviewed climate change professionals and questions Australia's combat to global warming, and they all denied their true efforts, and the UN requested them to do. The sea of such misinformation, in denial, and inaccuracy may even upset the active parties when they deserve to be at least acknowledged. Evidently, one of the human rights matter is to consider the right of truth, implying knowing the complete truth regarding the events and situations that transpired, which in this case is abused. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And finally, we have Wajid.
Hello. First, I would kindly like to ask you to please raise your hands if you do actually believe in climate change and human rights violation and are aware of it. Good. Raise your hand. So, my point is, no news media platform is against climate change or human rights violations, nor they disapprove of it. If we open any news channel any day of the week or visit their websites, we will find them talking about ongoing wars and refugee issues, as well as providing the viewers with ways to donate to human suffering and climate change outcomes. Sky News website has a climate change section, and recently they put in this section everything that has to do with climate change. For example, the organization Extinction Rebellion has released a short film on November 2009 addressing everyone and calling them to demand their government's plan to address the climate change crisis. So news media is actually asking you and calling out for you to address your government, to address people, to take action against towards human rights violation and climate change. it weren't for news, media, and forecast, we would not be able to know when dangerous and harmful weather changes are coming and where. In fact, if it wasn't for news weather forecast, that informs people and urges them to stay at home or take the necessary precautions, a lot more people would have been affected by climate change, which leads to human rights violation as well. An article by Peter Benenson was published in the London Observer in May 1961, talking about an organization called Immensity International. So this organization, it was born from the press and human rights activists. This is a clear example that the viewers can influence the press, and the press, together with the viewers, can act as gatekeepers and form organizations like Immensity International. This organization focuses on human rights and has over 7 million members and supporters worldwide, working together as gatekeepers, addressing human rights issues and making a difference. Whatever people take away from the news media is up to them. Everyone have their own opinion, and they usually stick to their own opinion, and they usually also find and support news media channels that supports their own opinions. Sky News followed XR activists on the October Rebellion to polarize the public and raise awareness for endangered species. CNN, Sky News, and many other news media channels have covered the young Swedish girl climate activist Greta Thunberg and her call to help and fix climate change issues. That has also inspired US students to stand for gun control in the United States, which help fix human rights issues. This tear between climate change and human rights violations and other different opinions, it was there before even news media was invented or popular. People have had different opinions, and people will continue to have different opinions. News media does not impact different groups or their opinions, they just embrace it, as it is a platform that reports news. If we just look around, for every right wing, there's a left wing. For every Democrat, there's a Republican. People formed opinions and groups long before the news media, like the ancient Greeks and their development of democracy around the 16th century BC. This helped people introduce their own opinion and preach their own opinion and find other people that supports their opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we're going to open up the floor to discussion, and in a minute we'll start taking questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, I'll call on you in a moment. Dalia, I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
Now, there was an article written by R. Sanders for Berkeley titled "In Media Coverage of Climate Change, Where Are the Facts?" Where he noted that the New York Times had made a concentrated effort to to demonstrate that climate change is real, but they failed to drive home the facts, or they're doing a poor job of driving home the basic facts about climate change. Dr. David Roms, the professor of Earth and Planetary Science at the University of California, Berkeley, said, "Public polls show that Americans, whether agreeing or disagreeing with the idea that human activity is changing Earth's climate, lack an understanding of the basics. A large percentage of the public doesn't know that global warming is happening now, and that is caused by record levels of CO2 from fossil fuel burning, and that 99% of climate scientists agree on this, and that the changes are effectively permanent. So it's clear that, according to Dr. David Romps, that Americans don't really understand how climate change came to be or what exactly is leading to climate change. And if they don't know what they're doing to cause climate change, they won't really be able to, they won't really be concerned on how to exactly stop it. What are your thoughts on that? Because to me, it seems like they might be, maybe as Sahar said, might be trying to set an agenda. Maybe they have their own agenda that, for example, they might have promoters or partners that they might be affecting by putting out certain types of news. Would you like to give your opinions on that?
May I ask when this study was conducted and published?
September 19, 2019.
2019. Okay. Well, as my partner said earlier, most of you raised your hands when she asked who was aware of climate crisis and human rights violation. And I believe that most people are aware of global warming nowadays, and most people do see it on the news very often, actually. It's actually, news media coverage of climate change is at an all-time high currently. It was never as popular as it is now. Actually, a global network of over 300 media outlets have ramped up climate change coverage as of this year because scientists called it an emergency, according to Al Jazeera News. And and even the example that our opponents, Sahar, I believe, mentioned earlier about Stephen Hawking and his 100-year prediction of climate change and the world ending. A simple research would show that CNBC, BBC, The Time, The Guardian, many media outlets have covered this issue, as well as it being circulated on social media. When the article actually came out, it was circulating around social media that we only had 100 years to go. People were outraged, people were freaking out, people protested. So I do believe there is adequate coverage. I do believe most of us are aware. I just think we are delaying and we're trying to distract from us actually taking action.
But why is it that, for example, the New York Times, according to Dr. David Romp, seems to be failing at driving home the basic facts about climate change?
The basic facts? Well, the basic facts are that human activity has been causing climate change, and I think most of us are aware of that. To prove that humans are responsible for climate change, the Climate Reality Project in 2019 actually put out a statement that said, as the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has increased since the Industrial Revolution, the peak of human activity back then, global temperatures have also steadily increased. In other words, there's a strong correlation between more carbon dioxide and higher temperatures. And while the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has gone up and down over time, all the coal, oil, and gas we've burned over 2+ centuries mean it hasn't been this high for hundreds or thousands of years. And I believe that most of us do know that we are the main cause of global warming. Most of us do know that this wasn't an issue before we were here or before the Industrial Revolution time. So I believe we are adequately aware.
Okay. Sahar, Sarah, would you like to refute that?
Okay, so yes, we are aware of it. Yes, some people may be aware of it. But I believe that if the news reporters do not say that enough, then it's not going to be really hooked in our brain. If they're, as my colleague has said over here, some newspapers, they only, say it for 5 minutes and then they call it a waste of time. I don't believe that is the right way to go at it. And if there is an agenda involved, and I mean that there is an agenda involved, how can we actually believe what we see?
So Sarah mentioned that they only covered climate change for 2 minutes and then 5 minutes, and I'd like to mention just quickly that The median length of a story with video on local television, according to PEJ's detailed studies of the medium, is 41 seconds. So that is more than double the time that a normal average story would get.
This is a crisis after all, so it does deserve to be repeated as much as possible. It needs to be rehearsed in some way so it can be implanted in our long-term memory. It has to be amplified, emphasized. It's just a rhetoric technique for us to be reminded to somewhat take action. Another thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned that it's our fault, not the media. So I understand that, but the media needs to change the way they talk about it. I understand again that you said that, okay, so we humans, when we feel guilt or fear, we tend to withdraw from that because we just like the easy way out. However, the media is a powerful tool. They have the power to inject ideas in our head and not change because that might be difficult, but the reinforcement theory suggested that they are able to reinforce some ideas. So for instance, the UCLA Engage project is one of the nation's largest one of the largest behavior experiments in energy conservation. Basically, they engaged through bombarding people with emails, telling them, and they had a bunch of people that they had a bunch of participants, and they conducted experiments where they kind of evaluated their usage of energy use, and they told them how much energy they used, the electricity and everything, and constantly emailed them about it. It wasn't just once or it wasn't for it was just there, and it was just constantly reminding them that it kind of scared them away because it impacted the three important things such as their health, environment, and money. But one thing that really motivated an action to be taken is when it concerned their health, especially with their children. This is an emotional appeal that they used, which kind of led them to take action for this. Nature is an unsolved, it's an untapped solution, and that solution can be taken further if we're constantly reminded about it, and if there's a resource out there that can help us, then why don't they help us? They are guaranteeing us safety, they're guaranteeing us education. We need that, so us people need to become literate about it. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your statements. I believe that news media is actually emphasizing on climate change and human rights violations more than ever. In fact, CNN, December 11, 2019, there was an article about, there was a video about called the Arctic saw near record heat again in 2019. Bill Wire, CNN chief climate change correspondent, said in the footage, "This is not just a changing Alaska landscape story. This is a Miami story. This is a San Francisco Bay story," emphasizing that the changing landscape and the global warming happening in Alaska will actually affect Miami. They will actually affect other countries and cities. Health scientist Michael Ha, in the same news video, found new kinds of ticks, bringing new kinds of diseases. Sue Major, scientist director, said, "The temperature we saw this summer is what we expected for 2069, this summer as of 2019. So we are 50 years ahead of what we thought we would be. if this is not alarming enough, I don't know how else the media could tell people that this climate change is actually a real issue, and it's actually happening now, and we need to act upon it. And some people, like other people, like sorry, my friend, she said that Stephen Hawking gave us 100 years for finding another planet, and that the news media didn't cover that. Yeah, that's true, they didn't cover that, but they brought someone even better. She's not a scientist, but she is the perfect example because we can all relate to her. In fact, she's only 16 years old. The Swedish girl, climate activist Greta Thunberg, she sat down in front of the Parliament of Sweden and vowed to stay until Sweden meets the carbon cutting target. She said the system of her school strike is that, and I quote, "Since you adults don't give a damn about my future, I won't either." After that, 1 million kids across countries joined her in the streets. She met with President Obama, testified on Capitol Hill, and showing solidarity with young people, suing the nation into action and making an effort around the world to shame the United Nations into action. This 16-year-old girl used news media to spread her message instead of blaming the climate change and human rights violation on the news media. This shows that a single 16-year-old girl can do all of this. Just imagine if we all came together, the amount of change that we could impact on this world, and how we could use news media in our favor to change the issue of climate change and human rights violation. Thank you.
Thank you, Wajid. We're going to open up the floor to a question from the audience. Does anyone have any questions for our panel? Valentina.
A lot of you said that we can blame media, that we should blame media. But, for example, sometimes media can do nothing. For example, when in Russia, there is a lot of people who working in government, and they have harmful business like oil or chemical business. And we by media, we're gonna try to influence government to take any actions, to do any changes. They're not gonna do nothing because they owners and they work in government. So in Russia, it's a very good example of what media just, and plus we should pay attention what a lot of these people who have this kind of business, they buying media, they do fake news just to cover how their business, how it's really harmful.
It's a very interesting point. Who are you directing that question to from our panel?
I don't have any specific person.
Okay. Sahar or Sarah? Okay, Dahlia, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I actually quite agree with that point. Actually, according to the United Nations official journal, the people responsible for environmental change and environmental damage are the state, individuals, and organizations. Those are the official bodies responsible for this, not news media. And news media can only do so much. It can report, but it can't actively take action. That's up to us. So you make a very valid point.
Thanks.
Okay. Would you like to say anything about that?
Okay, so earlier I explained that it's the news media is reflected by the political ideologies. They are in control, they can censor, they can block, they can do anything they want. And media outlets, they request media outlets to do that. And you make a quite fair point, which kind of explains why it is very difficult to rely on the media, especially when it comes to news media. We've become reliant on it because it seems as an established source. It's the television, it's important, it's where all the verified information is there. And if that's not given accurately or the way we deserve it, then there's no point to watching it. It's just kind of glimpse of, it's just body coverage, which is not what we need. We cannot be in the gray area. We can either be black or white. And yeah, so media can be blamed for.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Watch.
Yes. Thank you so much for your. So, CNN a few years back recently released a video where it says 97 scientists agree that climate change is caused by man, not social media. News media. A survey in 2009 was sent to 10,000 PhDs and Masters of Earth Science that include climatologists, meteorologists, anthropologists, and so on, and asked 2 questions. The first one was, do you believe the globe is warming? And the second question, do you believe man is most likely the cause? The answer to that was 82% said yes, they believed man is most likely the cause. I admit this is not a 100%, but how long do we have to wait till this number gets bigger? Do we wait for 99% or 100% before we start to address political potential famine and the human rights and other human rights violation issues? I believe that 82% is a very large, alarming number, and this survey was conducted only for scientists, for Earth scientists. Thank you.
Thank you, Wajid. Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Year-old Palestinian girl. Her name is Jana Jihad, I think. How many of you have heard of her? Okay. She's sort of, if you will, on the counter side of the Swedish girl, if you will, young lady. So again, relate this together. You have, on the one hand, human rights violation, because Jana Jihad, the Palestinian young girl, talks about how the rights of the Palestinians are violated almost on a daily basis. She broadcasts this, and in fact, she's the youngest journalist in the world, as we know. And then on the other hand, you have Greta, who is touring the world, talking about climate crisis. The question then becomes, how does the media cover either one of these young ladies, and to what extent does that affect our individual human rights, perhaps, or attitudes and beliefs and opinions about either one of these issues? For any one of you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ade, for your question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The 2 young ladies are a perfect example, and they bring awareness of giving that they're so young, and they are the perfect fit to preach about human rights violation with Jana Jihad and Greta Thunberg. They are the perfect 2 examples because they represent youth. They represent the future on this planet. They are the future. So I believe that they are perfect examples, and the news media is covering them on different news media channels to show the world how dangerous it is, and to bring attention to the world, because they are very, due to their young age. Thank you.
Just to address your question, as for news media coverage specifically of climate crisis and human rights issues, news media coverage is very low, and an example of this, another example aside from the ones that you mentioned, is the Syrian war. Journalist Liz Sly reported that her and her team had been reporting on the war for years, for 4 years, about the desperation of refugees who fled the country and the 250,000 people, including children, who had died. But it wasn't until the photo of Alan Kurdi, which she posted, circulated and was released, that people actually paid attention. And this proves that news media does report on the issues very consistently, very passionately. Yet, she said, if it takes photographs of dead children to make people realize children are dying, so be it. And unfortunately, things don't click with us unless it becomes a trend nowadays. And this is also true for the climate crisis. In a journal titled Why the Media Matters in a Warming World, media coverage of climate change was reported to only occupy a small proportion of total media reporting, and most people don't even watch news media coverage anymore. So the information is there. Most news media sites, all news media sites have a climate change section. Everyone is reporting on it, yet we're not paying attention on it. The views are statistically the lowest for these issues, actually, because we don't find that entertaining. What we find entertaining is celebrity gossip and the latest trends. As I said, we'd rather see our favorite news anchor performing the most popular dance or doing something entertaining than reporting on children dying.
Interesting. Sahar?
I would actually like to say I do disagree, because I do not agree, because we really do tend, especially in our generation, we do tend to focus a lot on the news around us. And when we do focus, people kind of bring us down. People are quick to say media is a tool, but I believe they undermine the power of media. When a 26-year-old engineer named Matar was shot while trying to shield 2 women from harm and protests in Sudan, everybody on Instagram went blue. They changed their DP to blue. Even a celebrity, such as Demi Lovato, she changed her DP to blue. And it took about 10 days. He was killed on June 3, and it took about 10 days. By June 13, it started getting coverage, such as Al Jazeera and BuzzFeed. And I would like to say, when you want to compare someone like Greta Thunberg and then Jana Jihad, look at how many news channels have actually brought Greta Thunberg, and how many news channels brought down Jana Jihad. I don't believe that is fair. And media is the cause of it. And again, media is not just a tool, because nobody is also born with political values. Rather, there are things that citizens learn over time. And obviously, this process is called the political socialization. Thank you.
I agree with you. I think that, like Sahar said in her opening statement, news outlets usually have an agenda. And to see someone like Greta getting so much coverage, maybe they have the channels promoting her have an agenda of her own. And they're kind of ignoring Jana Jihad.
Yes.
Who, is very few people would actually know about what happened with her, and it seems like Greta seems to get a lot more attention. But why is that? Why is it that news, if they really want to be objective and just report the facts, seem to ignore other problems from other countries that maybe just don't really, that might not appeal to, let's say, the Western world?
Well, I think any news outlet will focus on items that pertain to them, and most news outlets focus on their own region because we have to focus on the issues happening around us so that we can take action for those issues, which is why they'd most likely focus on something pertaining to them around their region, around their area. News outlets from there would mostly cover someone like Greta Thunberg.
All right, thank you, Dahlia. Thank you all for being here. We've come to the end of this debate. I'd just like to say some final remarks. I believe we had a very fruitful debate about climate change and human rights violations. And a lot of our lives usually revolve around some form of media. We're on our phones all the time. We are always connected. We always know what's going on. And yeah, sometimes certain channels might have their own agenda, might have their own beliefs that they want to promote themselves, but it's important that we continue to discuss and inform and see the other side. So it's there are always two sides to a coin. You need to look at the other sides, and I think discussions like this help us learn a lot more about the other side. And I'm sure some of you have learned quite a bit as well. So thank you all for being here, and I hope we continue to discuss this topic outside of this theater as well. I hope you guys go out and talk about it, because it is very important and we need to keep discussion alive.